So yeah, a brief introduction from myself and Sue. Thank you for that, Sue. And then we'll be handing over to Holly from One Not Waste to do a little workshop. And then we've got another workshop with Klaudia, who is One Not Waste alumni and a soil ecology student. And then we've got a little shout out from a local food waste project, and then the Q&A portion of the session. So I'll just kick off by talking about why we're here, what's the point of the session. So obviously we're talking about food waste. So I've just got some quick statistics for you here. So the UK wastes an average of 9.52 million tonnes of food per year. UK households bin 4.5 million tonnes of edible food each year. So that's worth approximately £700 for an average family household. So, that is money essentially in the bin. And there's a quote here from Marcus Gover. If food waste was a country, it would be the world's third biggest contributor to climate change. And, in the meantime, 1 in 9 of the world's population do not get enough food to eat. So some pretty shocking statistics there. And, they're not meant to shock you or scare you, but I think it's good to be realistic about the situation. So I'll hand over to Sue now to remind you that hope is not lost.
Actually some statistics from The Guardian show that food waste per person has dropped by approximately 7% in the last 3 years. So that's between 2017 to 2020. And also kind of reducing the food waste is one of the #1 solution to climate change. And just thinking back to sort of my own area of work, a focus for the student union and advice is kind of student well-being and also finances. And we thought that sort of the workshops would link quite nicely with that, in the sense that some of the benefits of reducing food waste are kind of relieving climate anxiety, and sort of for students particularly, it's a really good way to sort of save money and help with your budget. And then also just sort of the positives that you can sort of get from knowing that you're taking your own action to sort of help the planet. I think climate anxiety is something that's been growing a lot recently, but studies have sort of shown sort of one of the best ways to kind of overcome those feelings is to sort of take some action. And so we hope that some of the stuff that you'll see and learn about in the workshop today is something that you can take forward yourself. Without any further ado, we'll pass over to our speakers, and Holly's here with the first workshop of today's session.
Hello, how is the sound? Is it all right for everyone? Okay, so we thought that my session's going to be like a bit of everything, right? So that you can come away with loads of ideas of what you can do, not necessarily to go and achieve all of them all at once, but if there are particular slides, because there's going to be like 5 stages, if there's a particular slide that speaks to you and you think that you could incorporate in your life, or there are some things that you already do, then give a little pat on the back, and hopefully at the end you won't feel sad about statistics. You'll feel empowered and ready to do something about your food waste. So before the food even gets to you, this is stage #1, right? So right at the start, you haven't even made a purchase yet. One of the key problems with food waste is the confusion around use by, best before, sell by, and that's a sort of less common one. So just to summarize very quickly what these mean. Sell by generally isn't really for the customer. It's kind of a guidance for the seller as such. So you can pretty much ignore that. Use by, these are things that can cause potential harm to customers if you consume them past the date, right? So these are generally things that involve like meat or dairy, and they're there for a reason. They're there for your safety. Now, this is so different to best before. Best before is literally what it says, right? Your product is best before this date. And then after, the quality of the product is going to begin to decline. So think about a cucumber. A cucumber has a best before date on it, right? But it's not suddenly poisonous like a day after. it's going to be fine. It's just slowly going to lose its moisture. Maybe it's going to shrivel up a little bit, and eventually it won't be very nice to eat. But you'll be able to notice when that kind of occurs. And one of the major food waste issues is seeing something as a best before and treating it like it's a use by. And it doesn't really help that when you see the reduced section in the supermarket that use by and best before are all lumped in together, because the law sort of treats use by and best before with the same selling rules, even though their consumer rules are different. So to start off with, just as soon as you understand that, you'll be cutting out so much food waste, because there'll be food that you're looking at in your fridge going, oh, I don't know, can I eat this, can I not? Probably can. Sniff, taste, you'll work it out. Obviously not if it's a use by. The power of a meal plan. So I know that some people are kind of averse to over prepping, planning too much, but very loosely think, what am I going to eat this week? Therefore, what do I need to buy? Don't just aimlessly walk into a supermarket hoping that you're going to come out with a full meal, because it's very unlikely that that's going to happen. Or you'll end up buying loads of things or come out with nothing because you couldn't make a decision. It will also mean that you use up the right amount of ingredients. So if you spontaneously every day go to the supermarket, buy all the ingredients that you need for the meal that evening, you're gonna have like a quarter of a pepper, like 3 tomatoes, like a handful of corn, or you're gonna have loads of random ingredients. So by meal planning, you know, oh, well, I used up 1/2 of this packet of tofu, so I'm going to need to use the other half in the next few days. So I know that there's going to be 2 meals where that needs to be used up, you know, that sort of thing, just keeping an eye on it. You might not know what kind of meal it's going to be, but you might know that there's a key ingredient that's going to shape that meal. Stop shopping whilst hungry. All right, you'll come out with high sugar, high fat content foods that won't fill you up, but will semi-satisfy you whilst you're shopping and once you get out. But you're likely to forget what things you were meant to be buying. And if you were going in to be inspired by the shelves, coming out with crisps and chocolate isn't going to really help you at all. Recognize the ripeness. So this is very similar to use by and best before, but essentially this is the image that I've got in the back here. On the left, you can't really see it, but is a sort of underripe pear. Then in the middle is like, you know, perfect-ish, and then on the right is starting to go a bit overripe. If you're eating that pear right now, get the brown one, okay? Because it's perfect. You are buying a pear for later in the week, then maybe get the pear that's a little bit firmer, a bit more green, because as you leave it in the fruit bowl, it's going to ripen up and you'll have it later on. So consider these sorts of things with use by and best before dates as well. If you're using something today, then get something that says use by today, because if you're not buying it, there's no guarantee that another customer is going to come along and use it. So you're helping others avoid food waste whilst also addressing it in your own household. So that was a whistle-stop tour of shopping. Next slide, please, Tash. Okay, so beg, borrow and steal. Must caveat, take this tongue-in-cheek, please. So this slide is all about, there are multiple places you can acquire your food in the first place. So maybe you're just short of one ingredient, maybe you're trying something new, you just want a little bit of something, you don't want to have to go out and buy a whole packet. Ask people if you can just use it. Olio is great, people give away food on Olio, so they're literally asking you to take it from them. But also tonight I'm trying katsu tofu. Cool, that's a little bit hard to say. And the recipe asked for 80 grams of cornflakes, and I don't have any cornflakes. So I just asked the One Not Waste Free Cycle group chat that we have. Someone who eats cornflakes for breakfast is giving me 80 grams of cornflakes. You know, you just gotta ask. But maybe you've got all the ingredients, okay, but you haven't got the utensils. So ask to borrow. Last year, I used to make loads and loads of soup, and I had a friend who was also into soup making but didn't have a blender. And I had not a fancy blender like this image. I had like a handheld one, and she would just borrow it for a week, make billions of soup, and then I'd get a couple portions back as a thank you. So you can also benefit. But maybe you're freegan, maybe you are on a budget, or you just really, really hate food waste. Bin diving. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I would advise that you familiarise yourself with your rights to bin dive. It's a little bit different in the UK than it is in America, because in America, they call it dumpster diving, and trash is considered public property. So it's not very likely to be prosecuted, but just make sure that you're allowed to be in the bins that you're diving in. And this lovely image here is a picture of me, not really, but me diving into the bins or diving in to catch food that someone's about to put in the bin, because I know that it's perfectly okay. So next slide, please. Okay. It's just taking a second to load on my computer. But whilst it's loading, if you do have questions as we're going along, please could you reference like which bit I've just spoken about, just so that by the time we get to the end, it's not a question like, can you talk a bit more about this, please? Because I won't know which bit you're asking about. Okay, let's get cooking. So you've got all your things now. Use meals that you're familiar with. So you know that this meal takes up half a pepper, it takes up a handful of mushrooms, and you know exactly what sort of amount of things you're going to need. Maybe it's something that you know you're definitely going to like. You know, it's good to get creative, try new things, but have a bunch of staple meals that you know you're definitely going to eat all of it. Look, we're never going to be able to portion rice properly. If you have mastered cooking the right amount of rice, you have made it in life, okay? But with other things, it is easier to portion. You know how much one portion is, you know how much two portions are. Alternatively to familiar things, get creative. If you've got a rogue ingredient, or maybe you've spied something in the supermarket you want to try, ask your friends for recipes, or if your friends aren't really that into cooking, just ask the internet, ask the world. People are very happy to share their recipes. I recently got my hands on 4 artichokes. I've only eaten artichoke once on a pizza from a restaurant, so I didn't really know what to do with it. I asked the Want Not Waste group chat. Nobody else knew what to do with it, so I googled it, and turns out you can just cook it like a Mediterranean vegetable type dish. So that's what I did. And I cook like onions, peppers, mushrooms with olive oil and stuff like that quite regularly with falafel and couscous. So I just lobbed in the artichoke as well. And so it wasn't really hard at all. I just had never seen it, didn't know what to do with it. But fear not, somebody on the interweb has answers for you. So planning a meal again, plan it around your spare ingredients. So this example with the artichoke, they needed to be eaten. And so I was planning a specific meal around them. Maybe you've got a particular sauce that needs using up, but you don't want to just have pasta and sauce again. Maybe you have some rogue vegetables that you got in your veg box and you've never cooked with them before, and you don't know what is supposed to go with it, whether it's something creamy, whether it's something tomato based, whether you bake it, whether you boil it, what. Plan the meal around the random stuff that's in your fridge, because then you don't end up with this like dog's dinner type situation where you've got like 3 chips, a tomato, and spaghetti, just because that's all you've got left. But remember, we have some forgiving meals. So you've done all the planning you can, you've been creative, but sometimes you've just got some veg that is starting to go on the turn, and maybe you don't have the freezer space, as we talk about later. Casserole and stew, they don't care about the structural integrity of your vegetables. you're going to boil it to death anyway. So chuck in that pepper that's starting to go a bit soft, or those mushrooms that are almost, but still safe, because you don't need that crunchiness of the things that you're adding in, you know. Whereas if you've been putting pepper in like a stir fry, or if it was in like a pasta salad or something, if you bite into squishy pepper, that's going to be a bit gross. But in casserole and stew, doesn't matter. Even better, soup and broth. You literally pulverize it. You're going to be absolutely fine. As long as the veg is still safe. You know, there's a period where it's great texturally and great taste-wise, and then it's the structure that starts to go, and then the taste as well, quite often with veg. And so it's in that section where you've still got so much food waste that you can save. So same with soup, broth, smoothies. We pretend like we can have berries all year round, but really they only taste nice in the summer. So maybe you've bought a punnet of blueberries and they're all rubbish. Pop them in the freezer, pop them in a smoothie. It doesn't matter, because something else will be the main flavour, and that weird texture that you get with blueberries when they're just kind of mushy, it won't matter, because that part isn't important for this recipe. So always have a few saviour meals, forgiving meals in your backpack, just in case. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm just going to move everyone's faces out of the way for my text. I've written, this is just for alliteration, but just how to get the most out of your food. I think the thing that really got me into food waste and addressing it was the Complete campaign. And it was a few years ago, and it was this massive idea about, we've just habitually stopped eating all of the food for no reason. So, for example, broccoli. Everyone just lops off the top and eats the little tree floret bits at the top. That's just basically water. There's hardly any flavour in there. The flavour is in the stems that reach to the little bits at the end. But then we throw away the rest. So we throw away the part of the vegetable that has the most flavour. Why do we do this? Peeling carrots and peeling potatoes, usually not necessary. We just do it anyway. We also chop the end off a carrot when only one end had a stalk coming out of it anyway. You know, things like this. The ends of bread. We're just chopping off the ends of things unnecessarily. And I really love this campaign that just sort of said, are you completing your food? Are you eating every possible part of what you're buying? Speaking of, for broccoli, I would recommend curries with sweet potato. Just part boil it, then chuck it in a curry. Very great. Store properly. I don't know why we're not really taught this in schools, but if it says store in a cool, dark place, don't store it next to the oven. If it says go in the fridge, put it in the fridge. I think students kind of struggle with this sort of thing when you're trying to share a fridge and cupboards and a freezer and that sort of stuff. But where possible, try and keep things in the place that they say, because your food will last longer. You're given instructions by the manufacturers, the farmers, the growers for a reason. Grow your own. So this is a super cool thing to start thinking about right now. If you've noticed in the supermarkets, they're starting to sell a lot of flower seeds, but you can also begin to purchase seeds for vegetables and things like that. And it's super, super easy. Literally, there's a whole aisle in Sainsbury's right now that is just basically like compost and seeds and loads of other like plant stuff. If you're a beginner grower, there are definitely some easier, more resilient things. If you don't have outdoor spaces, maybe you only live in a flat, there are things that you can choose over others. I definitely give a quick Google for your local climate, because I appreciate not everyone is in Manchester, not everyone's in a flat or a house with something they can put in. But even something as simple as a grape punnet pot, it's got the holes in so water can filter out of the soil, some spring onions or bulb type things, so that you're not trying to grow like lettuce when Manchester's weather is so abysmal all the time. Regrow. So this is something I do. I personally don't grow my own when I'm at uni, but when I'm at home, I claim to grow my own, but actually it's my parents that do it. I just eat it. So at uni, anytime I have spring onions or celery, I just get a little dish of water, one of those goo pots is good, or just any jar. I've used most of the spring onion or the celery down to about this much left, and I just pop it in. And you can grow a bit from just being in water, or if you have a little bit of soil, you can replant. But personally, I just pop it in the water, get a bit more, chop it off, put it in the water again until it just can't take it anymore, spring onion wise. Then the celery, you're not growing new, massive, chunky big boy celery, right? You're growing the leaves that come in the inside. And celery really transforms a soup. So if I've used all the big bits for crunching on with hummus, I regrow as much of the inner bits as I can and then just whack it in the freezer so I can use it later. And that's just no effort for me either. I just get a jar and shove it in with some water. Mini stock takes. So your fridge is essentially your business, right? It's your money, it's your effort. You're the one profiting in terms of energy and also in terms of finance. You know, you don't want to lose money buying all this food and then not eating it. So check what's in your fridge before you go shopping, before you plan a meal, just if you're bored. You know, how many times a day do you just look into the fridge because you're trying to avoid doing your work? Whilst you're there, write a shopping list, take a stock take, work out what you've got, because I check my cupboards so regularly just because I really struggle for food inspiration. So my way of not wasting food is by not eating. No, of course I eat. But I just never understood how people could have a potato that has grown in the back of their fridge or in the back of their cupboard, because I check my cupboard so often because I'm like, oh, something's going to inspire me. But then people bringing out these potatoes with long, like wiry roots growing out of them, I could never understand that. But I know that it can be very easily done. So check for any new veg that you're growing in the back of your cupboards, any furry friends. And by regularly checking, you'll avoid things getting to that point, you know. And freeze. Jokes. Use your freezer, okay? If you don't think you've got time to eat something, freeze it. Like if you're not going to make a soup straight away, or you're not going to make a casserole or a stew. I had half a pepper left, but I knew that in the next few days I wasn't going to eat it, so I just chucked it in the freezer. And we'll get onto a slide at the end where you will all learn to love your freezers. Next slide, please. Lovely. So we've got onto spare parts. Now, I didn't want to label this as leftovers because leftovers hint that you've cooked and prepared a meal and there's a bit left over, right? But there are so many bits and bobs that you can still eat or you can still use that you might not necessarily realize. So basic one, saving the leftovers, whether it's a whole portion, whether it's just an ingredient, utilize oleo and your friends or your housemates. I think somebody put in the chat earlier about like neighbors as well. Maybe you made a meal, it was nice, but you don't really fancy eating it again the next day and it's not suitable for freezing, right? Someone will definitely eat that. And especially if you're in a student area, students love getting a free dinner, I tell you. So it will not be hard to rehome these things. I love this little image of the broccoli on the left. I consider the stem of a broccoli a spare part. So save that for the soup. Complete your food. Banana bread. I will share a secret with you. It's not really a secret because I've been telling everyone. I think the best banana bread is made with defrosted bananas. So when they get so ripe and you're like, okay, this is getting it's probably not going to be very nice to eat how it is now. People always say, oh, use really overripe bananas to bake banana bread. But often you don't have the time to bake banana bread when your bananas over-ripen, because the whole point is that you were too busy to notice that the bananas were going too ripe. So chuck them in the freezer, then like I'd say about half a day, but 24 hours is fine. Defrost them, and then sort of like squeeze them out like a yogurt out of a tube. Like, you know, those little frozen yogurt things you can, fridge yogurts, one of those, and it just gets the sweetest part of the banana. It is gross, like, to do. It looks disgusting, but repeatedly I have baked the best banana bread with frozen bananas, so cannot recommend it anymore. That's all I've got to say for that one. Last slide, please. So the freezer is your friend. The bottom drawer of our freezer is just all my veg, all my spare ingredients, and it gets to the top and then I ignore it for a few days and it starts to overflow. And the thing that motivates me to actually make the soup is when I have to make a decision on whether this item of food is going to have to go in the bin because there's no space in the freezer anymore. And then finally I'm like, okay, I'll make soup. And it's just basically literally anything. I'll put apricots in there, celery, lettuce. Recently I made a green veg soup, which basically constituted of fine green beans, broccoli, celery, romaine lettuce, 3 apricots, half a pepper, and it tasted delicious because the seasoning is everything. Whether it's veg scraps as well, you might think if you like peeling your carrots, right, you like that texture, well, just pop the carrot scraps in there instead. Batch cooking, if you have the time to cook, utilize that. Don't just cook once. Cook for 2 portions, maybe 3 or 4 if you've got massive woks, and put it in a Tupperware and freeze for another time. That will also help to save money for those days where you're like, I can't be bothered to cook. Should we just get a takeaway? When the only reason that you wanted a takeaway is because you were too tired to cook. But if you've got a frozen portion already, you can just heat it up in the microwave or in the oven, and it takes about the time that it would take for a takeaway to be delivered to you. Same with spare portions. So maybe you didn't plan to batch cook, but you ended up with a spare portion. So that can be frozen as well. Yeah, the freezer has, having this size freezer with only 2 people has transformed my life. So I understand that not everyone else has the luxury of a whole bottom drawer to just use for their veg scraps. But making soup is making soup is super easy. Oh, we should. That is great. It is really, really easy, especially when you've got loads of random veg. So just any tray that can go in the oven. All the random pieces of veg, no need to defrost them, and just a little bit of oil, and just leave it in there for as long as it takes for things to get soft. Give it a prod every now and then. I usually cook at the same time, so I just leave the soup to do whatever it's doing in the oven, and then cook my dinner. And then by the time I've finished eating and socializing, it's probably ready to blend and season. It's very minimal effort. Don't need to watch it at all. Yes, I feel like I've got most of that out now. Yes, I think there's nothing else to say for that bit. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Holly. That was a lovely insight into lots of great food tips. Just stop sharing there. So now I'm going to pass over to Klaudia, who is going to talk to us about composting. So over to you, Klaudia.
Hi everyone, I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Cool. So so my name is Klaudia. I'm a Want Not Waste alumni, and I'm currently a soil ecology student and also a member of Manchester Urban Diggers, which is a social enterprise spreading edible gardens or edible organic gardens around Greater Manchester. And we'll be talking about Manchester Urban Diggers and the food waste projects that we do later on. So throughout university, studying environmental science during my undergrad, I've been very interested in soil health. And this has led me to an interest in composting, because this is a really simple way of building soil health for food growth that you can do from home. And in addition, it gives new life to food and garden waste. So composting builds soil health because it feeds soil life that drives soil processes. It promotes soil structure, so it can retain water but also resist erosion. Also, composting prevents food from going to landfill, and food waste in landfill can undergo anaerobic decomposition, which means it breaks down in conditions when there is little to no oxygen, and that leads to the production of methane, which is a greenhouse gas more potent than CO2. So I'll be talking to you about how you can be a soil health advocate and how to reuse your food waste all in one through worm composting. So worm composting is also known as vermicompost or vermiculture, and it utilizes worms to produce nutrient-rich fertilizer. So the worms will eat free green waste. They pass it on as worm castings, which is just a nice phrase for worm poo. And that's your vermicompost. And vermicompost is rich with soil bacteria because the worms convert bigger pieces of food into a product that is smaller but has a larger surface area, and that allows any bacteria and fungi to feed on it and then continue the decomposition process, releasing nutrients for our plants. The worms used for this process are called red wrigglers or tiger worms. These have been found to be the most suited for this kind of thing because in nature they remain at the soil surface, so I guess that makes them more tolerant of being placed in a container for composting. There are different types of worms that you can use for this, but these are just the ones I'm most familiar with. So a really great thing about vermicomposting is that you don't need any outside space to do it like you would with a normal compost heap. So you can do this in your garage, on your balcony, or under your kitchen sink. And this is also an ideal way of composting if your main food waste is just fruit and veg. So how to vermicompost? So you want to find a container. And this can be something, so my wormery is quite simple. It's just a plastic storage container that you might already have around the house. You can also buy wormeries, or you can build your own or reuse something else. There's loads of cool designs, so you can get really creative. We actually built one at Blackfields Market Garden today out of a wheelie bin. It's got a really nice door with a handle on it and everything. It's quite fancy. Yes, so you want a container, and then you want to add bedding. Oh no, sorry. Also, you want to make sure there's airflow in your container. So you can see in the photo I've drilled some holes at the top. And then you want to add some bedding, and that's for the worms to live in. So imagine it's kind of like the soil for worms to move through and live in. So I added at least 5 inches of bedding to my wormery, and the bedding can be things like already made compost, soil, shredded up newspaper, cardboard, coconut fiber, sand. Ideally just a mix of that stuff. And then once you've got your container, you've got your bedding, you want to add your worms. So the worms I bought, like I mentioned, the tiger worms, and I bought them from a website called Yorkshire Wormery, and they've done really great. I recommend them. I've had my wormery for over a year, and the worms have multiplied in that time, so I'm assuming they're happy. Yeah, so how to take care of your wormery. So you want to feed it in moderation. So once the worms are added to your wormery, they need some time to establish themselves. So you might want to add just a handful of food and then give the worms a week or so to get used to their new space. One drawback of wormeries is that you can't add too much food waste in there. So if there's too much food added to the wormery, the worms won't be able to eat all of it, and then other things will start to eat it. So the food might go moldy, and then once the mold, which is a fungus, once it starts eating that food, all the nutrients are taken out of it, so the worms won't be interested in it. So yeah, I'd recommend feeding your worms, not feeding them more than they need. It's best to feed them less than more, if that makes sense. because they will also eat through the bedding, so they will be fine, they won't go hungry. But yeah, like I said, it's not like you can just throw all of your food waste in there, because it can get moldy. So that's one limitation of worm composting. In terms of the location, you want to keep your worm in a cool, dark place, because the worms can actually cook. So if you leave them out in the sun, they won't have a great time. If you keep your wormery outside, once it gets really cold, like to freezing temperatures, you might want to either bring your wormery inside or wrap it in a fleece. You also want to maintain moisture in your wormery. So worms need moisture to breathe as they breathe through their skin, and the moisture helps them absorb the oxygen from the water around them. So you want your wormery to be moist or damp, but you don't want it to be waterlogged, because the worms can either drown or it can go anaerobic and start to smell. Yeah, so if your wormery did ever get too wet, you just want to add some like cardboard or newspaper to soak that up. And you would also want to add some bedding every few months or so, because the worms will eat through that. I feel like wormeries, they're quite low maintenance and you can't really go wrong. So yeah, as long as you follow these few tips, you should be just fine. So what can you add to your vermicompost? Like I've been mentioning, you can add fruit and vegetable waste, any tea leaves, coffee grounds, but you want to avoid acidic foods such as citrus, onion, or garlic, because the worms just don't like that. They won't eat it. Any tougher foods may take longer to break down or to be eaten, sorry. So like cabbage leaves or avocado skins, they take a very long time. And I've got some in my wormery that have been in there for months, and I think, yeah, the worms just aren't going to eat them. And as with most composting, you don't want to add any meat or any dairy or oils or sauces, because that stuff is a bit more difficult to deal with. But worms, yeah, they do seem to enjoy boiled rice and quinoa, which is really fun to see, because you add it and then when you check on your wormery in a week or so, it's all gone. So it's cool to kind of see that process. I also like feeding my worms bananas or like leafy salad stuff or coffee grounds. So in terms of when your vermicompost will be ready, it can be just a few months. It doesn't really take long, again, because the wormery is smaller, so it's a bit of a quicker process. But again, because it's smaller, you don't get as much compost out of it. You know your vermicompost is ready when you can't see any of the food you've added to it. So any banana peels, they're just gone, and you're left with a soft black material that may smell earthy. It's kind of hard to describe how vermicompost looks like. It's one of those things where you just kind of know when you have it. And you can harvest your compost by placing all the food waste to one side of the wormery. The worms will migrate to that side, and then that will leave the other side ready for you to harvest, and hopefully there won't be too many worms in there. Yeah, another thing about vermicompost is that it's best used as fertilizer. So it is it's quite nutrient rich, so you wouldn't be able to grow seedlings in it because it could burn them. So you want to either use it as fertilizer and add it to just around your plants, or you might want to mix it with some garden compost to kind of reduce the richness of it. And if the wormery doesn't sound good, there are other things you can do. So bokashi is one method of composting that I'm yet to try. So this is when you add bacteria that ferment the food waste, and in this form of composting, you can actually compost dairy and meat, which you can't really do with most composting methods. And then so you don't get a black fluffy compost out of it, but what you get is this fermented product that you can then add to your compost heap or bury outside. It's a bit of a strange one, but yeah, I'm excited to try it at some point. And another thing you can do is to ask your local community garden or garden centre if they accept compost. So for example, at Platfields Market Garden, we do accept some kitchen wastes. So again, no meats, no dairies, oils or sauces, but we do accept your coffee grounds, banana peels, apple cores. And if you were to bring it, then make sure you pass it on to someone at the garden rather than leaving it outside, because it can make a mess and that's not great. So now I'm going to hand over to Mike, who also works at Manchester Urban Diggers, and he's going to talk about the project and what we do. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Hi, my name's Mike. I'm one of the directors of Manchester Urban Diggers and work with Klaudia. We're a community interest company that was established in 2019, and it was sort of off the back of developing Plattfields Market Garden, which we started in 2017. And Plattfields Market Garden is basically a community supported agriculture project. So we're part of a network called the Community Supported Agriculture Network. You can look them up. It's sort of a way of growing food with the support of the local community. And that's partly because there's a lot of issues with making growing food a viable business. So off the success of Plattfields Market Garden, we decided to set up Manchester Urban Diggers because we realised there was a demand for the kind of work that we do across Manchester and beyond, actually. So we've now developed quite a few gardens as well as Plattfields. We've got a rooftop garden, which is a container garden that's in Stockport on the roof of the Mersey Shopping Centre, right in the centre. And that's in partnership with a restaurant called Where the Light Gets In. And the idea of that garden is to reduce food miles, reduce food waste, be able to produce hyper-local ingredients for the restaurant. Sam, who runs the restaurant, has got a real ethos in sustainability and zero waste, and they've just become one of the first winners of a green Michelin star. And they do like totally mental stuff that you wouldn't think about. Like I went last year and they made a broad bean soup and then fermented the shells from the broad beans into a tea, and that was like the drink that you had with the soup. So they are really, really concerned with using absolutely everything that they can. And then we also do a lot of sort of community focused work. We do a lot of work with Buzz Health and Wellbeing Service across Manchester, and we've developed a wellbeing garden with them in Miles Platting. That's called Ridgeway Street Community Garden. And there's bits of veg growing that goes on there. Part of it is designed to be a bee and butterfly garden, so it's trying to attract more pollinators into the area. And then we also are developing a few other gardens around the city that are just sort of starting up. We're building another community market garden that's in partnership with a local school. That's in Beswick, and the idea of that is that we're going to develop something similar to Plattfields Market Garden, but it's going to be more of a centre for education and try and get a lot of the school kids that were from the school that we're partnering with to become actively involved in food growing from an early age. What else do we do? We've also sort of provide design and consultation services. So we've just designed some new gardens for Platt Hall in Plattfields Park, which is going to be a dyeing garden. So it's about growing sort of ornamental plants and vegetables that can also be used for dyeing and weaving. Yeah, and then I suppose that leads me to sort of the biggest food waste kind of thing that we do. So one of our founding members, Joe, worked for an organisation called Feedback Global that are based in London for a few years. And as part of her work there, she was the Northwest Gleaning Coordinator. And for anyone that doesn't know what gleaning is, it basically sort of comes from hundreds of years ago, when there was very limited landowners in the country. I know there still is now, but basically when farmers had finished their harvests at the end of the season, any sort of leftover veg that they had in the fields, they would allow the local sort of peasants to come onto the land and glean the leftover veg that they couldn't use or didn't want anymore. So the idea of modern day gleaning is that we go out to local farms across the northwest and harvest any vegetables that either the farmer can't sell, or they might have had a glut because the season was a good one. There's a lot of different reasons why farmers have this food waste, and a lot of it's to do with government policy and the way that supermarkets have power over farmers. But I think they worked out that about 5 million tonnes of fresh fruit and veg went to rot in the fields 3 or 4 years ago, and that only seems to be a continuing issue. So we're actually funded by DEFRA and RAP to go out gleaning, and we're starting a new project this year where we're hoping to go and glean 3 times a week. So last year we did 1 glean a week, and we managed to save about 13.5 tonnes of veg from going to waste, which I think, according to like the government sort of what is a portion of vegetables, it worked out at 165,000 portions of veg that we stopped from going to waste. And everything that we glean, it gets distributed around Manchester to local charities that work at feeding people most in need. So we provided veg for 42 different charities across Manchester last year, and we're hoping to maybe even triple or quadruple that this year. So we're looking for people to come out gleaning in the fields with us if anybody's interested. We also run a lot of volunteering across all of our sites. It's partly because of the CSA model that we have at Plattfields, but we're sort of expanding that across all of our projects. So we've got about 300 volunteers at the moment, but we've always got room for more. So if anybody's interested in volunteering with us, they can do. I think that's about everything that we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Klaudia. That all sounds really interesting. I'm just going to share my screen again for the final slide, where we've got some links with other places that you can get involved. And we've also got a feedback form. We would really appreciate if you could fill that in for us. So yeah, thank you, everyone. I apologise that we've run over a little bit, but I'm happy to stay on. You know, if you want to hang around a bit, that's absolutely fine. Please pop your questions in the chat, and we can get those answered for you.
I think we actually had one question a bit earlier, was how does anyone, or how can anyone join the Want Not Waste Free Cycle group chat?
Apologies for mentioning that. It was an internal group chat for volunteers and alumni, because we realised that we had a lot of stuff that we were trying to give away on Olio, but with the pandemic and everything, it was making it quite difficult to, I don't know, like organise picking up and stuff, whereas if we're coming on shift, we can just leave it for someone. However, if there is demand for it, I don't see why a Facebook group or something similar could not be set up for a Want Not Waste community page. But I'll just ask around, see if it's something that other people would want, because there's so many different like platforms already that exist to share things like that. But maybe if you're of a particular in a particular halls or of a particular society or course, you could always set up a group chat for your course. Maybe it could be like start off academic related and be like, oh, you know, textbook exchange type thing, but branch into sort of food waste or other thing. We share all sorts of nonsense in our in our free cycle chat.
Yeah, I was going to say, if that's something that you're interested in, definitely check out Olio or Too Good To Go. I think they're both apps that you can easily just download on your phone, and yeah, just swap and claim things that people are giving away. So yeah. Sue, was there any other questions that have come through?
I just had one from Sammy saying, how does everyone feel about eating peels? And I guess I wonder if anyone does sort of eat peels as standard. I know myself, generally it's more like carrot peels stay on and potato, don't peel them. But yeah, if anyone's got any other kind of suggestions or feedback about peel adventures they've had.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. I don't think I'm like you as well, where I avoid creating a peel in the first place. But I guess with things like bananas, that's kind of a little bit different. I personally haven't eaten a banana peel. My family, like my grandma, was obsessed with eating the cores of things. So we'd always be like, oh, just everyone pass your apple cores back and we'll put them in the compost. And she'd just be like, and then we'd be like, where's it gone? And I remember I read a Beano album once that was saying like someone ate sunflower seeds and in the cartoon they grew sunflowers. So it really like put me off eating seeds of things like that. But I try to eat the cores of things like that, like pears and apples.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't eaten orange peels. I've made like a bath scented type thing, but it wasn't really as aesthetic as it was. Literally a bath with some orange peel in it. It didn't look very good once I'd poured it in, because I sat it in water, I think, or maybe oil, I can't remember now, and then I like poured it in the bath and it just looked so silly. But yeah, Klaudia, what about you? Have you done anything with peels?
No, not really. I tried to make like a body scrub out of salt, rosemary, and orange peel. And again, it's disgusting. Like, it looks nice in the jar, but when you try and use it, it's just a very gross and messy process. But yeah, like Mike just sent through a message that we have a chef on site called Lorcan, and he just he does so many amazing things with food waste. I think we had a lot of British kiwis the other week, which were very tiny. Yeah, we just had loads left over, and then he turned it into a kiwi chili sauce, I believe, something like that. And so yeah, he's giving another life to all that stuff. But yeah, I have not tried peels myself, but I am curious. I haven't even thought about using banana peels as food. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I have curiosity, but I think often compared to the eating an orange and then also nibble on an orange peel like just raw, I think it's so bitter in comparison to the orange, because that's the point, it's protective, so the animals taste the bitterness and go, oh, nothing here to. But yeah, that's maybe we'll all start eating peels.
Just got a question through asking about, so obviously food waste is very linked with plastic waste and plastic pollution, so it's kind of a general question, but to any of you guys, like, where's your favorite place in Manchester to get plastic free fruit and veg and food? Obviously, if you can't grow your own, the next best thing is buying it plastic free.
Every week I say sign up to the veg, and I'm in my third year of my degree now and I still haven't done it, but I aspire to do that before, right? But I think part of why I've not done that is because more supermarkets are offering this fruit and veg, so it is very accessible, a lot more so than it was a few years ago, but there are even better places to get your fruit and veg from, and you can get a veg box at Platts, and they have their market on Saturdays, which is really cool. I've always popped by on my walks with another Want Not Waste volunteer. We will say hello. But yeah, Klaudia, what about you?
So I find that going to a lot of shops that have a lot of I don't know, like Asian, European foods, they tend to have a lot of fruit and veg that's not wrapped in anything. And when I was living in Withington, I lived just around the corner from one of these shops, and it was beautiful because you could get just mushrooms, you know, not wrapped in anything, you know, anything you wanted, like nothing was packaged, and it was really, really wonderful. Yeah.
And exactly how much you need as well. I think since Sainsbury's started doing loose mushrooms, the amount of money ending up in my freezer tray has massively decreased, because I just buy how many I need, how many I think I might use in the next few days, because when your only option is to buy a massive tray and you only wanted one meal with it in, it could be quite difficult, and especially with things like mushrooms, a bit and not be very good for you, you know, compared to other veg where it just goes gross, really. But yeah, there's also, I feel like he's called Banana Man. No, maybe
Did it have a banana? Maybe
have a banana. Thank you. He has a fruit and veg stall outside MMU at All Saints. So I know a lot of people, the universities were open, used him a lot, and I think in the city centre there are quite a few veg stores. A couple of archways where one's a really cute like secondhand bookstore, and then the one next to it is like a fruit and veg market, and it's just like a whole city centre. But yeah.
Is there any more questions in the chat? Can you see, Sue?
No, I think that was everything.
Okay, cool. I think we'll leave it there then for today. But thank you for coming along, everyone. It was great to see you all, and great to hear from our speakers. So yeah, thank you very much for coming along.
Yeah, thanks everyone.